welcome to this panel discussion all about cannabis and its relevance in the future of our physical and mental healthcare. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I'd like to invite those watching to drop a question or two in the Q&A box as we move along through our conversation. After about 30 minutes or so, we'll filter those through to our relevant experts. One thing to mention to those watching who might be unfamiliar with our panelists and myself, this discussion is all about CBD and medical cannabis. We won't really be discussing the recreational side of things today. That's a whole other segment in itself. So let's get into it with the introductions then. I suppose starting off with myself, my name is Roisin Delany. I am the founding editor of the UK's first ever cannabis publication, the Cannavist magazine. And joining me today to discuss how cannabis might fit into the future of our healthcare is this very fine group of experts. So thank you all for joining me. I'm going to just do a brief intro for everyone because I know everyone has a long list of things that everyone has done in the past while in the cannabis sector. Starting with Dr. Elisabeth Phillips. Dr. Elisabeth is a clinical neuroscientist who specializes in the endocannabinoid system and phytocannabinoid medicine. Dr. Daniel Couch is a specialist registrar in general surgery with a very special interest in cannabinoid medicine, and he is the medical lead at the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis. Ed McDermott is managing director of EMMAC Life Sciences, Europe's largest independent cannabis company, and Ed has been actively involved in the medical cannabis conversation with UK and European policy makers and advocacy groups through the years. And Oliver Mammon is chief infusionologist and lab director of one of the UK's original CBD houses, Taylor Mammon, which was recently acquired by Kentucky-based hemp and CBD producer Jen Canna. So there you have it. We have a wonderful kind of range of experts from various different backgrounds within the CBD and the medical cannabis space. And of course, as I mentioned at the very beginning, feel free to ask us a couple of questions as we go along. We'll get to those towards the end. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here on your Friday evening UK time at 5 o'clock. Thank you for giving up the last hour of your working day. Let's start with you, Elisabeth, if we can, because I know you are, all about the endocannabinoid system and what it can do for us. So for those watching who perhaps are curious about CBD, medical cannabis, and how it works in the body when we take these products, could you kind of talk us through the endocannabinoid system in the body and how it functions, if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course. And hi, Roisin, and hello to everyone at the Healthspan Show joining in. It's a really good place to start because, as you said, THC, CBD, these phytocannabinoids or the cannabinoid chemicals that are found in cannabis plants, and there are over 100 of them. So, these aren't exclusive cannabinoids. They act within the body primarily within what's called the endocannabinoid system. And this system was discovered only in the 1990s, which is remarkable when you think about it, because evolutionary, it's appeared in sea urchins right through to present in every mammal today. So it's not a newly sort of generated system. And the cannabinoid targets in the endocannabinoid system are found throughout the body. So there's a real dense population in the brain. So the endocannabinoid system is very important for brain function and everything from mood to brain balance. There are targets found within the skin, within the gut, the immune system, the bone. It's really spread throughout. And so what's really important about achieving supporting the endocannabinoid system through these phytocannabinoids or hemp-based cannabinoids is to achieve balance, because the endocannabinoid system is all about balancing in the body. So again, if the endocannabinoid system is balanced, we have good mood, we're feeling relaxed, we're less anxious, our immune system is functioning well, we feel less stressed, or we're better able to cope with stress, we have better gut function, bone health. So really what we're talking about here today in terms of products is something that covers, a wide range of health issues. So it's really important that we understand a bit more about the endocannabinoid system, but I'm the first to admit as an endocannabinoid scientist that research is playing catch up with the cannabinoids at the moment. So we're discovering really every day, every week, a lot more about how the endocannabinoid system is important to our health. But that's really the main system where the hemp-based cannabinoids like CBD and THC work in the body.
And you know, from your experience and your kind of career background, I suppose, so far, you know, what was it about this kind of area, the endocannabinoid system, and things like CBD, THC, and the medical side of it as well, that really kind of attracted you to this kind of area of medicine in particular?
Well, I'm always keen to keep on top of, you know, sort of new innovations and new areas that are advancing in medical science. And it was about sort of 3 to 4 years ago that really CBD products in the UK sort of really came into popular, into the mainstream. So personally, being a clinical neuroscientist, running a clinic where I sort of specialise in brain injuries, neurodegenerative diseases, I was very interested in these new products coming in. And, you know, we have to understand, you know, cannabis has been used medicinally for thousands of years. You know, this is not a new product or new use for phytocannabinoids. It's just understanding a bit more how they work in the body. So I chose a company that I knew had a really good product that I could recommend to clients. And, you know, I've been recommending CBD products as a food supplement, certainly, you know, for a number of years now. And research, as I said, is beginning to play catch up. But, you know, if we're looking at real world evidence around medicinal cannabis, around CBD food supplements, you know, we're seeing really, really important advances in the areas of pain, for example, certainly sleep, reduction of anxiety. You know, I see all of these, you know, very positive outcomes with using these particular products.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Just to the extent that it can help. Dr. Daniel Couch, if I can come to you next and kind of put that same question to yourself, you know, as a practicing doctor, what convinced you of medical cannabis? Because you did your PhD in cannabinoid medicine, I believe. So, you know, what was it that actually like spoke to you about this kind of area?
So, I work in general surgery, which is just a simple surgeon. And one of the areas that I work in is in inflammatory bowel disease. And one of the inflammatory bowel disease, as many of our watchers will know, is a dehumanizing chronic disease. It really is life-changing, and it absolutely drags people down and can ultimately lead to the loss of life and devastating loss in the quality of life. And for me, one of the striking things about inflammatory bowel disease is that although we have lots of drugs available to help dumb down the inflammatory response, to try and get on top of the inflammatory bowel disease, a lot of the drugs themselves, although they have a clinical therapeutic effect, the side effects from them are sometimes almost as bad as the disease itself. They're very expensive, they often don't work, and they have lots of side effects. And so about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided to undertake a period of pharmacological research in the lab and in clinical trials, trying to find a new drug target to treat inflammatory bowel disease. And at the time, there was increasing interest around the phytocannabinoid CBD. And as Elisabeth has stated, one of the endocannabinoids, PEA, which is our sort of, as Elisabeth explained, one of the internal cannabinoids we make ourselves. And I really wanted to explore what the benefit was amongst patients with inflammatory bowel disease. And I undertook a period of research at the University of Nottingham, which essentially culminated in a clinical trial looking at whether CBD would be of benefit in these patients, and went on to publish some of these results. And I did that period of work, and I was very happy with that period of work. But actually, for me, the wider problem with cannabinoid-based medicines is actually the many barriers that patients face. You know, we know that in this area of medicine, that in some regards, the patients are well ahead of medical research and ahead of clinical attitudes towards medical cannabis. And so there's not just the barrier of breaking down the research goals, but also some of the wider barriers to accessing medicines in this space. And that's what's drawn me to work in this landscape in this way.
I suppose one of the things that I'm kind of most curious about asking you about is, you know, are other doctors who aren't yet in this area asking you questions about medical cannabis now? Is it something that, you know, our healthcare professionals are growing a curiosity for and legitimately want the facts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there, you know, when I first started working in this sphere, there were, you know, almost no doctors in the UK. I mean, there's an international community of doctors, but certainly no doctors in the UK had really had much interest in medical cannabis. But those attitudes are changing, and those attitudes are changing because there's emerging research and because patients are asking their doctors about this. And so it's not so much of a taboo these days as it used to be. Certainly, when patients talk about, or when doctors are inquiring about medical cannabis, it all boils down to evidence, and high quality clinical evidence fuels clinical attitudes. And that's where the challenge lies in medicine, certainly in the UK and around the rest of the world.
And obviously as well, just to bring in your role at the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis as medical lead, your, you know, I suppose the role of the CMC is a massive part of that. Are we going to see that come into the being in the next couple of years, do you think? What does the landscape look like around data? My Wi-Fi died for a second, but I think I got the gist of the question. And so the generation of data really is at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. And there's a number of ways that we can do this in the UK, which I'm sure we'll go into during this session. One of which is the collection of national prescribing attitudes and patterns and the real world data and how this affects patients. And the second way is commissioning appropriately sized, well conducted randomized clinical trials, because they really are the best way to assess whether there is, you know, without bias, the effect of the medicines. And engendering this is certainly at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. Is that the answer? Yeah. Is that the answer to the question you're asking? Yes. No, it was what does the data kind of scape look like, I suppose it is what I was asking. So yes, that's a perfect answer. Thank you very much. Oliver, if I can come to you next and talk to you a little bit about Taylor Mammon. First of all, incredible success in recent years. And, you know, being one of the first kind of CBD kind of powerhouses, I suppose, to start off in formulation and private label and all that kind of stuff, to now be acquired by a company like Gencanna out of Kentucky is fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your kind of CBD journey then, and how you got into all of this, and what drives you about CBD.
So I got involved in this industry as a patient. Okay, so I was, when I was 7 years old, I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. Don't know if you know about Tourette, but it's like a cluster of OCD, ADHD, and physical and verbal spasms, word fixation. So I mean, it's kind of a challenge, which is kind of fun. So yeah, so I've had Tourette my whole life. I started self-medicating when I was like 16 years old. I tried CBD for the first time when I was like 22, and I found that I had a lot of the relieving benefits which I would get from cannabis without any of the, call it distracting psychotropic effects of THC. So I realized that I'm onto something, but the one thing I couldn't figure out was what I was actually taking. Like how many milligrams of CBD was I actually taking, which made me feel this way. I knew I was taking a pipette, but there was very little information behind the bottle, behind the product, explaining to me how many milligrams I was actually consuming. So this must have been when I started actively involved in the industry. I was around 25 years old, about 7 years ago, was when I first started making CBD products. And my aim was to figure out, you know, how do I make a product which is actually accurately dosed? Because at the time, what you were buying is you were buying a CBD oil, but no one really knew what was in it. Nowadays, you know, mathematical accuracy and, you know, directions for use, it's a standard. You know full well your 1,000 milligram 10 ml bottle has 200 drops in it, so it's 5 milligrams a drop. And you know full well that these brands in the marketplace, which are dominating the marketplace, do things properly. But 7 years ago, that didn't exist. And that's what we really went out there, and that's what we created. I remember I spoke at the first Hemp and CBD Expo 2019 in March, and still at that time, mathematical accuracy didn't mean anything. Now it means everything. But I have to take slight responsibility for screaming at so many people saying, what the hell are you doing? There are patients at the end of this product who have no idea what you're selling to them. So if you're not going to do it properly, don't do it. And that was basically our rocket fuel was, you know, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this properly. What separates us from everyone else in the marketplace is we actually understand why a CBD product is made, the purpose behind it, and what we get is constant validation from all of our consumers and end product users that the products we make are actually functional for the purpose they need them. And that is what my aim is to try and push across the THC market as well, because there seems to be a lot of understanding that cannabinoids can do a lot, but the actual understanding of what cannabinoids are needed for what are very, 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 you could call it broad. You've got this idea that a Parkinson's patient and a cancer patient need the same thing. They don't. You have this idea that an ADHD patient and a Parkinson's patient need the same thing. they don't. And what happens is, it's not even about categorizing it in terms of ailment. It's even more personal than that. You know, a 4'6", 50 kilo Parkinson's patient and a 6'5", 300 kilo Parkinson's patient need a different dose. Why? Because cannabinoids are personal, might be higher, might be lower, based on tolerance, based on consumption. It's that sort of understanding which we want to try and get through, so end consumers understand what they actually need for themselves to make a difference with this miraculous plant.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about kind of what you do and how you got into all of this is how the kind of CBD kind of sector, aside from the medical cannabis sector, and we'll park the medical side for a second, but the CBD wellness sector in itself has kind of evolved over the last kind of, you know, in a very short space of time. You know, you could call it 3 to 5 years if you want to. So what do you think is the biggest area that we're seeing in terms of product categories at the moment? Is it tinctures? Is it vape? Is it edibles? What's the kind of categories? What are they looking at right now?
So the issue is at the moment it's a seller's market. All right, and the general population of active users out there are not directing consumption habits, whereas they should be. Because fact of the matter is, as an arthritis patient should be deciding what cannabinoids, in what format, in what delivery method, in what carrier they need for their ailment. But the problem is right now it's being dictated to them by by the sellers, by the retailers. And I do believe that the retailers are selling patients. Use the word patients because most people who use cannabinoids use them for a reason. They use them for a medicinal or a health reason, whether we like to admit it or not. These patients are not being guided correctly. And it's the patients who really need to speak up to say, you know what, actually, we need better products in this field or in this field. At the moment, I believe it's very much a commercialized market where sellers are selling products in the hope and the aim that the end user will find satisfaction, as opposed to designing actual products with a purpose.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to bring Ed in on this now, on the kind of, you know, from the CBD manufacturing side with Oliver to the manufacturing of medical cannabis and increasing awareness of medical cannabis as we go forward. EMMAC also had a massive kind of announcement there a few months ago with Curaleaf and the acquisition that everyone was talking about at the time. So congratulations on that. Ed, if I can ask you, you know, for your kind of overview of the landscape in the UK from when we had the announcement of legalization in November 2018 to where we're at now. Could you kind of sum that up for our viewers to just explain to those who may be unfamiliar with what has happened in those 2.5 years?
No problem. It's quite a sort of complex thing to depack, so I'll try and do the sort of Cliff Notes version of it. But essentially what happened is there was a sort of political a patient advocacy movement that led to a political decision being made to reschedule cannabis as a finished product as a Schedule II medicinal use product, rather than a Schedule I product, which is what street cannabis effectively is, and what cannabis not in a final form is still considered. So we effectively had a situation where policymakers jumped the gun to some degree, and don't get me wrong, we're all very grateful and pleased that that happened, but there wasn't actually a framework, a specific cannabis framework in place to deal with medical cannabis at that point. So you had the laws change, but patients didn't know where they could access the product. Doctors didn't know at that point particularly how they could prescribe it, other than it had to be a specialist prescriber, which is still the case today. There was an unlicensed medicine framework, which is called specials medicine, which did effectively encapsulate how you could bring a cannabis product in as a finished product into the UK and then distribute that to a patient through a pharmacy, assuming they had got a prescription from a specialist clinician. Now, initially, the cost was great to patients. I mean, it is still a self-pay model here in the UK, so it's still a tricky scenario, because obviously here in the UK, with the health system that we have with the NHS, people are used to not paying for medicines and getting them free on the state as part of their tax payments. What's happened is those barriers have become, and those hurdles, if you like, that patients had faced have become significantly less. They are still, to some degree, hurdles. Not everyone can necessarily afford the product, so it's obviously not what the industry wants. We obviously want there to be access through the traditional medical framework, which we have here in the UK, which is the NHS. But as Daniel very correctly said earlier, you know, the medical community and those that govern the NHS are not prepared to allow us to be part of the treatment tools that the NHS provides, because there isn't deemed to be enough evidence yet in the form of clinically trialed products. That brings us on to a whole different discussion about how complex it is to create a market authorized product from a plant and still keep it as a sort of whole plant product or an extract. But essentially what happened is you had a marketplace open up, an access pathway that opened up, but it took a long time for both patients to understand it properly, the medical community and particularly clinicians to embrace it, and also there was a big barrier in terms of price. So most of those things have been worked on significantly to the point where products are effectively costing less than you can get them on the black market. So they're actually cheaper now to in many cases to get medical cannabis products than it is to buy it from a drug dealer, which is obviously a great step forward. There are more and more clinicians that are willing to prescribe cannabinoid medicines, and there are more and more patients accessing products through specialist clinicians. So we are starting to see a big rise in patient numbers. We are coming from a small base, but I think we do have to remember that, you know, everyone looks at Canada and North America and says, oh wow, they've got it right. But, you know, certainly in the case of Canada, medical cannabis there's been a legal route to it since the early 2000s. So I actually think in the trajectory that we're on will be somewhat more aggressive than what we've seen in North America. It's just that we have started some years later, and it took a little while for us to, you know, navigate our way to sort of creating a framework that actually works, and you know, created a situation where people were actually able to access these products at a sort of somewhat more affordable price, in lieu of being able to access them through the traditional channels of the NHS. So we are starting to see a much healthier market now. But in terms of the 1.4 million patients here in the UK who are currently accessing products through the black market, that was a YouGov survey back in 2018, I believe it was. You know,
absolutely, yes, it was.
Yes, we still have. Sorry, I would like to check these things sometimes. But you know, in theory, we have to see a 25 to 50,000% increase in patient population to actually tackle that 1.4 million patients. So it goes to show how small the market is at this point. But the compound growth month on month of patients is spectacular, really. And you know, from a you know, it's a great thing to see.
And I suppose, you know, you mentioned, you hit on like the US and Canada there as well. And I suppose it's not a bad thing that we're behind them, because we can learn from their practices, and we can learn from their experiences and the public kind of consensus around it as well, I suppose. And then if we're looking at, you know, Europe as well as the UK, taking that as one for a moment, and like the potential that's there to build such a massive patient community and help, you know, potentially millions of people is just incredible when you think of, you know, how this one plant can make such a difference between CBD as a non-medical kind of wellness product and supplement kind of category with the medical side of it. You know, all we need is the green light for access, and that will come with time, fingers crossed. You know, are you seeing that compound growth like you just discussed? Like, is that something that you're actively seeing month on month?
Absolutely, it's becoming more, you know, initially, you know, early days when we were sort of first starting to actually see, you know, there was a bit of tumbleweed right at the beginning of the market, I'll be honest, where we were sitting there going, you know, one prescription came through and we were very excited about it. You know, we're now dealing with, you know, thousands of prescriptions a month. Now, granted, that's still a very, very small percentage of what we're expecting to see as the years go on. But, you know, we are seeing anywhere on a monthly basis between a 30 and 50% increase in prescription numbers each month, compound. So, you know, that growth is there. The patients want to access these products. There are much more avenues for them to, and choice as well, in terms of, you know, there are doctors, there are far more clinicians than there were before. There are significant shifts in the way that clinics work in terms of patients being able to move into a shared care model. So again, trying to reduce that cost of seeing a specialist clinician, because in many cases, some of the indications that patients present with aren't necessarily hugely complicated. In some cases, they obviously are, and they need that clinician every single time they come in. But in some cases, it's very much a case of those patients can go into the sort of more traditional shared care model, which allows, again, just bringing the cost down, because we as an industry are all aware that cost is still a major issue, and making it affordable for patients is key. There's also a huge amount of sort of different ways of looking at this. Daniel mentioned earlier RCTs, which obviously are the traditional route in which a product would be brought to market authorization, whereby you can actually talk to a patient about your product as a supplier. In the case of cannabis, it's unlicensed medicine. We can't do that, but we are looking at other routes in which to demonstrate sort of more real world evidence through the likes of patient registries, whereby we're effectively getting data from patients with their willingness, I should add, in order to drive evidence and show more than anything that the side effects are not a problem, and that, you know, ultimately patients are benefiting from it. But the patients are the people who are telling us, not necessarily the lab work that's being done, as would be the case. I mean, I'll let Daniel and Dr. Elisabeth deal with the sort of complexities around RCTs, but they do have a very important place to play in this. But, you know, ultimately there's clearly a very willing and needy, I should say, patient population who want to access these products. And, you know, we as an industry, you know, the medical community, we're all doing everything we can. We're all playing our part to try and give comfort to the regulators, to make sure that, you know, at some point in time, we give enough evidence that makes the NHS, for example, in the UK, comfortable to have cannabinoids as one of their treatment tools.
I think what's really kind of interesting about what you were tapping into there is like this category of medicine on the medical side, but then on the CBD side as a wellness category as well, which Oliver will probably attest to, is, you know, it's very much the consumer leading the manufacturer, the patient leading the manufacturer and the medical system, which I think is just really interesting to watch develop at a very quick rate. I think you probably agree.
It's really unusual. I think what the crazy thing about the cannabis industry is it's very, very, very rare where you have effectively a product that has been utilized already by people for medical conditions in various different formats, either as nutraceuticals or as a medicine. But of course, in that particular circumstance, they're acquiring their product from an illegal market, where you have a product effectively coming out of prohibition that has so many use cases, both as a nutraceutical product, as a health and wellness supplement, as a actual medicine, also that big pharma vertical that, you know, Daniel referred to, which is more RCTs and market authorized products. So it's a very, very unusual situation, but that is the opportunity, I think, for the world and for people and their health in this cannabinoid space.
Yeah, it's very true. And I want to tie this next question in across Daniel and Elisabeth, if you could both kind of share this load. You know, in terms of, you know, the kind of education question that always comes up when we do these kind of events, and there's doctors sitting on the panel, and people always say, you know, well, you're doing this and you're getting behind this, you know, how come it's not like a, you know, a widespread thing? How come we don't yet have you know, everyone kind of suddenly getting interested in this. And obviously one aspect is the kind of clinical data, the randomly controlled trials that just haven't happened yet, as we were talking about. What else can we do to kind of broaden this conversation and spread the kind of education around it a little bit better?
Shall I, Elisabeth, do you want to say it or shall I?
No, take the lead, Dan, and after. Yeah.
So as Ed has touched on, is, you know, cannabis has been used colloquially for a long time, you know, thousands of years. And if cannabis had not been previously used in communities for all sorts of reasons and for all sorts of benefits, and we had developed a new medicine that targeted the endocannabinoid system, but nothing to do, but no one had ever heard of cannabis, you would then try and force it along a parallel route alongside existing well-described and well-utilized pathways for developing safe drugs. There would be you would put it through phase 2 trials, about 20 patients, and then eventually a phase 3 trial of much bigger, 200, 300 patients, to see if there was a benefit, tease the, you know, balance the drug slightly and get it to the right group that it has an effect, that works effectively in a safe way. The problem is that it's, you know, it's being forced through a sort of a parallel route, which is very uncomfortable, causes a lot of emotional upset, you know, understandably, because patients feel that there's benefit to them. I think that one of the wider problems is that we're at risk of is that in these kind of debates, there's a lot of doctor bashing that goes on. I think I straddle both domains. I am an advocate for the use of these. I think they have a benefit. I think they have a role. Where that role exactly lies is yet to be determined, or the number of roles it has to be, or the full extent of the roles to be determined. But I think we need to be very careful that we don't doctor bash, because that's just going to generate more animosity. And the last thing that we want is patients banging on the doctor's door. Doctors don't want to talk about cannabis because they're completely turned off by it, because all they get is vitriol, which is understandable. And so I think that in order to kind of wider the conversation, to try and engender an open attitude, both amongst patients and doctors and developers and the industry and researchers, I think we keep coming back to this, it all boils down to the evidence. What we need are randomized controlled trials. We do have randomized controlled trials. You look at multiple sclerosis, there's already been 14 trials studying over several thousands of patients, and we did find a benefit, and that's now reflected in the NICE guidance. Trials are going on. Perhaps the most next widely studied indication is probably pain. There are some very large randomized controlled trials going on at present. These trials take a long time to first recruit and then collect the data and analyze it and publish it in a way that we can all read and address for ourselves. And I think, and then there are other indications as well and other trials ongoing. I think 3 years ago, we didn't have that benefit. So we couldn't say there are trials that are happening now, because now there are. And I'm overjoyed to be able to sit here and say that that's the case. And I think that generating data, so we can all sit down as a community and say, look, these are the risks, these are the benefits, and we know this because we've assessed them in this way, in an open, unobservational, unbiased way. I think that's the best way to engender, to exclude animosity from the conversation, which I think we all agree we need to avoid.
It doesn't help. And I suppose, Elisabeth, you probably have some thoughts on that as well, about, you know, how we can use, like, you know, the kind of data that we have and the promise that we have kind of going forward of keeping everyone open-minded to see the analysis and to see what comes down the pipeline, and kind of you know, broaden that conversation little by little, nation by nation, if you like, from, you know, Canada to the US to the UK. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, I know part of my passion is the education, but, you know, we do have to, you know, expand the knowledge around endocannabinoid system, and as Oliver was saying as well, you know, around understanding products, be they be CBD or medicinal cannabis. But in the medicinal cannabis space, I think what's really interesting is that there is a lot more funding coming in now for these trials. And as Daniel said, it takes a long time. So, you know, we're playing catch up. You know, as Ed said, we are doing the reverse of what we do, you know, normally. You know, we identify targets and then we look at products products, whereas we've got products and we're trying to go through the target route now. So it's very encouraging that there's a lot more money coming in for trials. I was just talking to a group at Imperial College yesterday, actually, Dr. Mikhail Sodrogren, and he's got another three PhD posts starting in the end of this year, all around medicinal cannabis, all around understanding more around products and you know, sort of looking into that area. So there's much more money coming into that area. It then takes us though to at what stage are doctors educated about this? You know, there's already a very packed curriculum in the sort of 5 to 6 years of training as a doctor. There's very little space for something as relevant as nutrition. So, you know, trying to shoehorn the endocannabinoid system when, you know, there's still, you know, a lot of sort of really important areas to come in is also going to take time. But, you know, I think what's important, as you said, is that we can learn as well as what's been happening in other nations, and we can take the data that's coming out, and we are moving this space forward. But again, it's going to take a bit of time, and you know, that can be difficult for patients to understand. That's not us being difficult, it's just, you know, the process that's there. But it is all moving forward in a very positive way.
Yeah,
I want to bring Oliver in on this. Yes, please.
Can I make a point?
Can I just cut in quickly? So I've been very quiet for the last 30 minutes, and you know what? I've been biting my lip here. Now, the first thing we've got to understand is it's not doctors' fault. All right, what happened is government went, they turned the key and they've dropped a massive bomb on you. All right, but unfortunately, when a bomb is dropped, it's the responsibility of where it's been dropped to fix up that mess. Now, whereas doctors don't deserve to get bashed, it's very important for doctors to assume responsibility for the damage which other doctors have done. So when you've got a whole wealth of medical practitioners who are slandering and destroying the name of a herb, which 5 or 10 doctors are trying to build up, doctors have to stay forward and be like, you know what? Some doctors are wrong. Doctors are misled. Doctors are not helping. There is this false terminology used by doctors. They create this separation in this cannabis industry. Cannabis sativa L is a plant, okay? Any cannabinoid which is extracted from cannabis sativa L is a cannabinoid, and therefore, if you talk about cannabis, you can't say cannabis is medical on one side and cannabis is recreational street black market on the other side. It's all the same. Now, what happens is Ed McDermott supplies a product to the UK market, which if it did not pass through Ed's hands, would be exactly the same as the products being supplied on the UK market in the black market. There is no difference between street cannabis and medical cannabis. It's grown the same way. Fine, certain genetics might have different spreads of CBD, THC, CBG, and other cannabinoids, giving a more balanced effect to the end user. But it's cultivated and grown in exactly the same way. And it's really important for all of the doctors who are helping us to get to this point, and these doctors who are helping us to try and create this industry, it's important for those doctors to stand up and be like, other doctors, you are wrong. And the problem is you have this grouping of doctors who are kind of, it's that loyalty. They want to protect each other. However, some doctors are destroying this industry. And it's still getting to the point where there are over 10,000 doctors in the UK, and there are 50 doctors who semi-prescribe cannabis. Now, I say semi-prescribed because you've still got to be a last resort, and you've got to go through the whole system and fail and fail and fail on so many medications before you're prescribed. Now, even your best friend doctor, the Mr. I am an advocate for cannabis doctor, will still make you a last resort cannabis patient. As in, I'm going to go and get my medical cannabis prescription. I have to prove that I've been on medication for a lengthy period of time that is not doing its job for me. And I've got to get my other doctor to communicate with my new cannabis doctor in order to have communication. If my doctor at this moment of time is not pro-cannabis, I'm never going to be able to go forward. And there's that lack of understanding. There's also this, like I said, this demonization around terminology. When you say street cannabis, medical cannabis, and CBD, it creates 3 separations, when actually it's all inclusive, it's all encompassing, it's all one plant, it's all the cannabis plant, just used in different ways and stamped by different people with different approvals, which is absolutely fine. The same way you have Evian and Fiji water and Smart water, they're all water, but at the end of the day, they're all categorized as water. They're all different, but they're all the same. And it's important, you know, that not one's not better than the other. And it's important that water manufacturers understand that they're all selling the same product, and cannabis people all realize that they're all in the same boat. And there's a lot of animosity in this industry where I see activists and doctors preaching from the same Bible, but they fight each other. And the activists hate the doctors, and the doctors hate the activists, because the activists put pressure on the doctors, and the doctors aren't doing their job. I personally think the government has dropped a bomb, and then they've walked away. And it's not fair to the doctors. They've done nothing wrong. The doctors who are trying to make this system work have done nothing wrong. But they have to take responsibility for the doctors who have done something wrong. And the 100-odd years of demonization and all of the comments of this is going to destroy your brain, this is going to kill you, this is going to end your life. It's very important that doctors stand up and say, we were wrong, okay? My colleagues were wrong. Like humans, we make errors and we stand on our errors, and now we are going to fix it. The same way medical negligence happens in many different parts of medicine, this is medical negligence, this idea that cannabis is dangerous. And I find it very offensive that even doctors who are pro-cannabis won't admit that other doctors are wrong. And it's very important. That's the only way we move forward, is by admitting your mistakes. Now, I understand you doctors are on the side of cannabis and you're making a change, but you have to admit your colleagues are letting the system down. And it's the only way we move forward stronger. Another thing is access, back onto Ed's price, access is nowhere near street value. Street value is a quarter of the price of what of some of these medical products. For example, I buy a FICO. A FICO is a full extract cannabis oil. I buy it from Europe, okay? It's a very, very, very similar breakdown to the Bedrocan product. Bedrocan will cost £2,000, and that £2,000 worth costs me £40. Now, why? Because I'm not buying it stamped as a medicine. Now, that doesn't make sense. Now, when it comes to illicit cannabis products, things like skunk, which are smoked on the which are smoked by recreational users, the same skunk sold by a medical cannabis company will have 3 or 4 times the price. Another thing you've got to bear in mind is the UK market is an import market. A lot of the illegal cannabis in the UK market started its life as a legal product. It's grown in Canada, it's grown in Spain, it's grown in Amsterdam, it's grown in Israel, it's grown all over the place in these legal economies, which are also selling this legal product to legal dispensaries for other legal patients to consume. So it's important to not forget the fact that a lot of what the black market is consuming is actually a medicinal grade product produced in a medicinal fashion. And a lot of this information is forgotten. But what happens is there's this separation in this industry between, one parties being the active users and the other parties being the active prescribers. And there's a miscommunication between what's actually happening. And it's very important to voice this, because the market is going to get better, but it's not going to get better unless we admit our mistakes and we actually try to make the market better. And with brains like we've got around this table, we can definitely do that. But that only starts once we realize that we've done wrong.
Just very
do you want to pop in there?
Yeah, just to interject. I mean, some of what you say is I would totally agree with. I think, often you'll see products that have come from exactly the same genetics. They're grown in a very similar fashion. There are different treatments applied to a product that goes to the black market, because there's no actual there's no C of A, there's no certificate of analysis.
It's not hard to get a COA. It's not hard to do.
That may be the case, but what I'm saying is, we have to irradiate products, for example. So that is very different than what you would get on a street product. In the terms of where it's grown, we have to prove that our products don't have all sorts of issues in them, such as heavy metals, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to do the same as street products. In terms of street product pricing, typically, and I would say this is for average Joe, right? I'm sure there are people out there who have great relationships with drug dealers and get a better price or whatever, but it's widely accepted that a gram of flour would cost somewhere in the region of £10 per gram on the street, right? That's reportedly the number, £8 to £10 a gram. Right now, you can access medical product that through the legal channel at £5 a gram, for example. Not every product's the same price, but there are products that are meeting that.
There's nothing available in the legal system which is as potent as available on the street. So for example, you can go and buy California grown cannabis on the UK market for about 10 to 15 pounds a gram, which is coming up at about 20 to 22% THC with a beautiful spread of cannabinoids behind it.
Oliver, sorry, I'm just going to have to jump in.
Sorry, that's fine. That's fine. Sorry, it's a different conversation for a different day.
I'm just interjecting very quickly because we have about 6 minutes left. But I think what Ed is, kind of getting at there, and we're going to take some questions from the viewers as well in a few minutes. But I think what Ed, you're probably trying to get at is the fact that if you're a patient at the end of the day, you want a traceable product made of high quality in a regulated industry is what you want.
Yeah, very much so. It's the same, in alcohol. The reason the alcohol business works, it does a lot of damage, a lot of harm, I should add. There's a huge amount of people whose lives are very materially negatively affected by alcohol, for example. But at least we can fall back on the fact that it's a regulated product. It has to be produced in a certain way. It has to conform to certain safety standards, and consumers have to know what they're getting. All the other stuff are social issues that come from the back of it, but at least it's taxed, traced, and consumers have to be in mind at all time. I'm not saying that doesn't happen with a legally grown product, but it's a very different situation where as a supplier, you're dealing with a product that is the same as any medicine. It's treated in exactly the same way as any medicine. Therefore, the penalties, what is expected of you as a supplier is exactly the same as Pfizer or any of the big pharmaceutical companies. So there's a huge amount of risk. There's a huge amount of thought and energy that goes into making sure that the consumer is absolutely as safe as possible and is as well informed as possible. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's that Oliver is right. That is a completely different conversation, and it's a very interesting one though. And I think it's one that should be tackled more often.
I'll get you on the show. We could do this. I meant no disrespect to anyone else, by the way. Like I said, I'm trying to big you guys up. It's more the outside system. But like I'm saying, it's incredible what you guys are doing. And there are like 10,000 patients on the UK market now who wouldn't have access if it wasn't for you. And it's a lot more of the people who don't understand cannabis who are coming to doctors like you. And some of them are being guided in the most fantastic ways. But I'm talking about how to access the other 1.8 million people who are using black market cannabis, we're using illicit cannabis, and it's how do you get them on board. But fact of the matter is what we're building in the UK is fantastic, and the different groups who are putting their necks on the line in order to build these systems. I mean, I've got nothing but respect for you and all the doctors who are involved, the 50 doctors who are singing the praises of cannabis across the UK. I have nothing but respect for all of you as well. I just wanted to throw that out there. It's everyone else.
I don't think anyone takes offense to that, Oliver, and I certainly don't. I think it's great. I think these conversations should be had at all times because ultimately, scrutiny on all of us, every single part of the, every vertical, every piece that comes together to create an industry effectively, because it is an industry. We all have to remember that. The better. Ultimately, it leads to better products, better pricing, healthier people. And that's what we all want at the end of the day.
And more importantly, longevity, which is what we're trying to create, a market with longevity. So we don't want to create something which disappears in 10 years. You want to make sure that, we're building something for future generations as well. Sorry, but amazing.
I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 3 minutes left. Speaking of longevity, I'm conscious of the time running out. I wanted to just kind of revert back to Elisabeth and Daniel, if I can, because obviously both being doctors who have embraced this, and obviously Oliver was putting across, one patient's kind of point of view of this and reflecting kind of, I suppose, the prohibition and the system that has led to this point that we're in. But it's just so fantastic to see that we do have open-mindedness now in the medical environment around the world, and that's coming to the UK as well, as we've discussed. So, would you like to tap in on any of that? One of the questions that we did get, which I direct at you, is how positive do you feel about this as an outlook going forward? We'll wrap it up after that.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick one. I mean, incredibly positive. As we say, we're seeing more and more, sort of coming in the research areas, more and more of the, sort of great products, the industries that are well regulated, the businesses that are well regulated. There is only longevity in this area. We're seeing it already, and it will unfold over the next few years and for the years to come. So incredibly positive about the space.
Daniel?
Well, yeah, I think that I am optimistic about the roles of these agents and their roles in treating and alleviating disease, and I think that's why we're all here. I think that I believe that this is a field worth expanding, which is why I've been working in it for the last eight years. And I am excited about the kind of the findings we're going to find in research and how we can translate that into the clinic. Obviously, there is a lot of unhappiness, as we've seen, and there's a good example of that, Oliver. But I think also it's important to not burn our bridges, to work together to ultimately improve patients' lives.
Absolutely, and we're going to have to wrap it up there, I'm afraid, because we are about 30 seconds away from being cut off. But thank you all to everyone for taking part. That was a really great, passionate discussion about medical cannabis and CBD. So thank you all very much, Dr. Elisabeth Phillips, Dr. Daniel Couch, Ed McDermott, and Oliver Mammon. Thank you all very much for your participation. Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Great. Thank you, Roisin, as well, for that great moderation. And thank you all to our panelists for joining that interesting discussion. So thank you all for watching. This is our last live panel discussion, but we do have one more session left before we wrap things up at Healthspan. That is starting in just under 10 minutes, and it's the Ask the Investor session, which is focused on the US market. And it is around the theme of the Mental Health Day. So I encourage you all to join that session, get your burning questions and get some advice on any emerging companies that are making waves in the space. Our investors, we've got a great line of investors in that session. So I look forward to seeing you there soon. And thank you all again for joining us. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.